Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our betting and DFS live stream for this week's RBC Heritage. Going to go through all of your live questions, everything you need to know for this week. You go out there, make some of your DFS lineups, enter some of those prop slips if you're a prop player on Underdog or Prize Picks. Just in general, go over everything out there for tomorrow. So let's start with the weather. We'll talk about some of the strategy involved with some of the forecasts over the next day or so. And afterwards, right, we'll go through DFS, props, everything individually. Make sure you have everything handled. But first off, welcome on into the live stream. Hopefully the Masters was a good one for you, and you're ready to get after it for another signature event. We got Barry down there, Nate down there in chat. What's going on? Steven as well. He's just smashed the like button. Couldn't have said a better thing to start off this live stream. So I appreciate you, Steven. Definitely smash that like button, guys. And my favorite pivot for tomorrow, or put that in the water. Favorite pivot, yeah, we'll talk about that one a little bit. There's definitely some low-end plays up top that are intriguing this week, but a lot of chalk that I'm playing too. What's going on, Bruce? What is going on, Philly? Why I win, Samuel down there. Let's get this thing rocking. So I'm going to share our screen. We're going to bring up the weather forecast to begin, and because it is a signature event and we don't have defined waves out there, it's usually pretty hard to find a weather edge. And when you take a look at the Thursday forecast, and it looks almost identical to what we're going to get out there on Friday, I don't see a lot of an edge to be had. So, I mentioned taking a look at the weather, but in terms of the main slate, there's nothing that's really impacting my play. So you'll see for Thursday, right, it starts off a little bit calmer. And then in the afternoon, the winds kick up just a little bit. And then over there on Friday, so I'll switch to the NAM model out there for Friday's forecast. It looks pretty similar, right? Starts off really calm, afternoon wave, gets a little bit more windy, but the waves aren't exactly defined, right? The guys that are going off the latest tomorrow are not the earliest tee times. So the tee times are a little bit wonky. And then if you're getting an edge for one day, so let's say that you're a later starter for Thursday, at most, right, you're going to get those 2-3 hours in the morning that are favorable. And that's really about it. So I think it'll offset day to day, right? I think the guys that get the advantage one day are probably not going to get it the next. Now you might be able to find like a group or two that, is in the maybe optimal spot. I know there were a few groups that were going off like towards the latter half of the morning wave Thursday. So like some of your like 10:30, 11 a.m. tee times that have like a 12:30 to 1 p.m. tee time on Friday. So I thought if anything, right, that wave looked like it might get the better side of it. But I mean, you're talking about like 2 or 3 groups, right, at most that are getting that advantage. So it's not something that I'm incorporating all that much. But for the showdown perspective, right, is going to matter a whole lot, right? If we're just taking a look at Thursday, the morning starters are, in my opinion, going to be playing in at least a half a shot easier golf course. So if you're playing the Thursday single round slate, right, take some of those early starters. So I think for each individual day, we're certainly going to have to consider this weather. But over the first 2 days, I don't see anything that is actionable, right, that we can go out there, make our decisions based off of, because it looks pretty flat. I would say a lot of times the later guys off on Thursday, right, the earlier guys on Friday get that advantage because they can keep that momentum going. That's a little bit diminished when we don't have defined waves to deal with. But I guess you could lean into that if you wanted to, right? You could try and stack some of the PM guys, hope that they keep it going out there on Friday morning. But I don't think it's the same as, a full field event where we have that cut line, we have all those players to worry about, and you really want to, carry that momentum from day one to day two. And that's usually good for going out there and making a cut line. So that's it for the weather. We'll circle back on this when we're talking about props. It'll be important, right, when we're trying to figure out how this golf course is going to play. But in terms of my modeling, not much has changed. We definitely heard that the golf course is a little bit soft. They got about 3 inches of rain in Hilton Head last week. So I think if anything, it's going to play a little bit easier than what we saw last year. And in terms of, the key stats that I'm looking at, comp courses, all of that, none of that has changed out there since Monday, Tuesday. So nothing I really want to touch on there. If you have any questions about the golf course, we can circle back to my model. We can talk about how I'm approaching things. But at least compared to what I had there on the Monday live stream, I literally haven't moved any of my model weighting. So it's very consistent from what we had on the start of the week. And I guess not much to talk about right there. What I'm going to move into is the DFS side. So we're going to go golf course, right, DFS, and then afterwards talk about props and talk about our strategy for the main slate. And, we're going to be mostly talking about GPP strategy here. We're going to go tier by tier, talk about a few highlighted plays. But as per all main slates, and I would say especially so for these signature events, right, large field GPPs are about getting leverage. And the reason why, especially for signature events, that we have to worry about that is ownership. The entire player pool is very condensed, right? We only have 69 players in the field, right? Around 70 for all of these smaller field events. And when you get that, even your lower owned guys, right, are going to be like 10% ownership. So like up top, for example, Jordan Spieth would be one of your true pivots, right? He's still 9% owned. And you can really see this effect down low where guys like an Adam Hadwin, Ricky Fowler, right, should be unowned this week, is still like 2.6% owned. So it's a week where you kind of have to commit to your pivots, right? There's not really going to be many guys that are sub 1%. In fact, if we go to the bottom, you see I have like Kevin Kisner at 0.9%. Got even guys like Eric Barnes, Bryce Garnett, right? I've got it like 1.2% ownership. So it's a little bit more condensed, which means that we really have to pay attention to ownership, right? Even our pivots aren't going to be that sub 1%, where sometimes in the 6K range, right, we can take a guy who's 0.2% owned, right? We can have a real chalky start, right? 3, maybe even 4 guys that are over 15%. And because we have 150 something options, right, 156 for a full field events, we don't have issues finding somebody that's completely unowned. That is not the case this week. So I think up top, you have to be a little bit more careful than usual when it comes to your ownership, which is going to put even more emphasis over here on this predicted ownership tab. So let's start up top with Scotty Scheffler, who of course is going to be a huge talking point. And it comes down to, first off, whether he finishes the weekend, right? Of course, has the pregnancy scare on the mind. If Meredith ends up going into labor, he's going to leave the golf course, just as he said out there at the Masters. But then also you have this $13,000 price tag. So I've gone back and forth the entire week on his ownership. At first, I thought it was going to be like 40% owned. I thought maybe even 30% out there early on a Monday. I started trying to build lineups with him at 13 grand and quickly realized that that was not going to be the case. Just if you throw him into a lineup, right, and just dick around with it over on Draftkings, most people, right, want a high-end 8K player. They want a 9K player as their second man in. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to go Scotty and then somewhat of a spend up as your second man in, that puts you down to like $6,600. So it's extremely uncomfortable. I don't think a lot of people are going to be willing to do that. And if they do take Scotty, I'm not sure if they're going to take that second spend up. So it either puts you into a very particular build, which is essentially Scotty and then a bunch of 7K guys and one 6K, or it takes you into a true studs and duds type of lineup. So it's, I think, going to be a little bit less popular than what some people think. And you can see I have him at about 20% ownership. So I don't think he's going to be unowned. He's coming in off all of these wins. That is going to command some ownership. But what I will say about him is that the price tag, the concerns about the baby, I do think you're going to keep him reasonable with ownership. So if you're going to take a stand on Scotty, it's a lot easier on a week like this. Like you can easily take 40% Scotty, and that would be about twice the field leverage right there. So I think you could still fade him. There's still a huge argument to be made, right? Kind of hope that his wife goes into labor or something. And then you're going out there and you're knocking out 20-25% of the field. But at the same time, he's on this all-time heater. He is by far the best player in the field. And when somebody's playing this well, you know, arguably you should play them at any sort of ownership number that they're coming in. And honestly, 20%, when somebody like Xander's 20%, right? Aberg, I've got it 19.4% ownership, is a huge ownership discount. So it has a drastic impact on where you're going to spend your salary. But at the same time, I think that adds to his value, right? Now, finally, we got him in the 13K range, right? Even like a $12,500 Scotty is probably a little bit too cheap. But now that he's closer to where he should be, I think he could be 14, even 14,500, and people would still try and jam him into lineups. But at this sort of number, we're starting to see the ownership come back down. So I wanted to point that out about him. He's not going to be low owned. I saw a few ownership sites that had him at like 10%. That is egregious. That is not going to happen. But at the same time, I saw a website that had him at 40% ownership. And I think that is almost just as egregious. So, you know, I think about 20% is where he's going to come in. I feel pretty good about that ownership projection. And I think he's a good spot. He's at the kind of ownership where you can get over the field. But if you're going to fade him, right, that's also a pretty solid ownership fade. So I would commit to it in one direction or the other and move on from there, right? Accept the outcome, right? If he goes out there, smashes, and you have him, that's great. If you decide to fade him for game theory reasons, he goes out there and smashes, well, you got to accept that too, right? And vice versa, of course, for both scenarios. So keep that in mind. What's going on, Brant? I got my water here, so cheers to you there. Too much caffeine in the system and no alk today. So we're taking it easy with some water. What's going on, Dave? would I start a contrarian single entry with Clark, Homa, and Willie Z? I think that's a way you could do it. Would I? No, because I'm not playing all three of those players, but I think that would be a very contrarian start. So I totally get that. Thanks, bro. Appreciate you. Of course, thank you for watching the live stream, man. What's going on, Jordan? What's going on? Sam says, surprise being a no-cut event. Yeah, it's a signature event, so that's what they're doing there. What's going on, Tanner? Thoughts on our boy Spieth? Low-owned, solid pivot. And I don't want to talk about him too much because I don't want to steam up that ownership. But yeah, you play him at his courses where he plays well, right? You play him at good course history spots, and that's exactly what we get here. And low ownership. That's the other part of it, too. Weekly one and done question. I got you. I'm ready for it every single week. You're torn between, got Xander, Fleetwood, and Lowry. So I like all three of those plays first off. Three of my core plays, of course. So I don't think that's a coincidence. But if you go defensive, you could take Xander, Fleetwood. Yeah, they're a little bit higher owned. Or roll the dice with Lowry. I like the Lowry play. Now, I think you're like pretty competitive in your one and done to this point. If memory serves me correctly, I still like kind of rolling the dice a little bit. So I'd go Lowry. It just feels like if you're going to take him at a signature event, one of the higher payout events of the year, this is the only spot for it, right? Do I think Akshay can get a top 10? Absolutely. Good form, pretty good course fit. You want to shout out Primero? It's only $1, but dude really put up a fight in the community contest. Thought you were going to get it. Yeah, it's fun. And this week, by the way, guys, I have a link down below to the community contest. It's a $5 contest this time, so I brought up the stakes a little bit. And you get to play for some bragging rights, and you get to talk a little shit in chat. So obviously this is the opposite, right? Philly giving some respect out there to Primero. He's been a long member of the channel for quite some time. The shout out to you if you're down there in live chat. If you're watching this on replay, you got your shout out from Philly. And get down into that contest. Again, link is in the description to the community contest. Go out there and play it around this time. We're playing for higher stakes here this year, and I think we're going to try and get more people in there. I opened it up to at least 100 entries. We can make it bigger if necessary. Any thought on the deep dive on Shank? Surprisingly, he's low owned. So he's actually a player I want to talk up later. I believe I had him as a highlighted play. If not, we'll just talk about him now. So yeah, I don't have him as a highlighted play, but I do like him. So surprisingly, about 8% ownership. And he's stacked up against some legit players from the head-to-head market. And he's even money odds against guys. I think it was like Taylor Moore that he was matched up against. So obviously Taylor Moore is pretty chalky, right? And Adam Shank is about half that ownership, right? If you're telling me that he's head-to-head into head-to-head markets and he's cheaper and he's lower owned, like I like that a lot. So yeah, I like him. Balanced approach should be the contrarian take. It can be, but it depends. If you spend up and you're taking Rory, right, as your first man in, that could be contrarian too. So it's way more nuanced than that, right? Might be shortcuts, but that's not the way to do it. Does win equity on somebody like Scotty mean a little bit less in a no-cut event? It does not. If you're playing in the large field GPP, you got to have the winner. So it still matters all that much. The big guy, ready for you to talk about what I like? The big Irishman. Yeah, he's a core play for me, man. He fits this golf course. Course history is fantastic. Hitting the ball, probably the best that he ever has. I actually took him at 40 to 1 on Monday, and I took more at 50 to 1 today. So I got even more value there. Thoughts on Keegan for a GPP? I like him as a pivot play. He's relatively low owned. Let's bounce back. Who is the one guy you're playing in a single entry? I don't know why you always say let's bounce back, man. Sunday went really well for us. We played Aberg, who went off, Homo and whatnot. So I don't know. I'm going to dismiss that part. I don't know what you're bouncing back from. But who am I playing in a single entry? Probably Scotty, right? As I just mentioned. But any one of my core plays is good for that, man. I'm not going to give you a single player. If you're going to say let's bounce back every single time, it's kind of weird. Brant says, one might say it's an elevated community contest. That's what I'm saying. We raised the stakes on it. And frankly, should I raise the stakes by giving away a Patreon membership too? We'll do it. So because it's the first week, we're doing it for $5. Fuck it. I want to make it an elevated community contest just because Brent said that. If you win this week, it's only for this week. It's not going to be every week we do this because we play like 50 events a year. It would get out of hand with the free memberships. You win a free month on my Patreon if you win that. So get in there. As soon as it fills, it's full for this week. There were 50 spots left the last time that I checked. If you go in there, you win this week, you not only win the first place prize, which is pretty sweet, you're also going to win a free month of that Patreon page. So let's talk through the rest of this 10K tier. We already talked about Scotty. If you have any specific players you want to question on, just go ahead and let me know down in chat. But what I want to do with this is talk through the ownership here, right? So Scotty, we already talked about that spot, but the rest of this is pretty intriguing to me. So Rory clearly doesn't fit the golf course, right? He doesn't play here for a reason, is 10% owned. I'm not playing him, but that intrigues me, right? If you're trying to get different up top, he is the clear way to do that. Then you have Xander and Aberg, who I expected to be chalk, but they're not out of hand, right? 20% on Schauffele, 20% on Aberg. I prefer Schauffele this week, but I know a lot of people out there are trying to tail Aberg because of the form. I understand that as well, right? The one thing I would kind of guard against is out of these top 4 players, you should be playing at most 2 of them, right? You can't fit 3 of them into your player pool. If we decide to do that, you're really going to be fading a lot of this 9K range. So, I guess it depends on how you want to make your lineups, right? I know we had that question before about the lineup construction segment, right? If you really want to load up on the guys up top, that could be a way to get different, right? It's going to be real studs and duds if you do that. I think a lot of people that are taking Scotty are more likely to take a Tommy Fleetwood, right, as a second man in, maybe go a little bit cheaper and you take somebody like a Cam Young, a Thagala, right, as your second man in that lineup. Those are going to be some of your popular choices. I think Matt Fitzpatrick, right, another player that's going to be used a lot with this Scotty Scheffler start. What I don't think you're going to see much of, and it's extremely hard to do, right, it's because of the salary that you're not going to see this very often, is to go like Scotty and then like even a Cantlay, right? That's an expensive combo, but if you did that, it's probably going to be extremely low owned. If you went Scotty and then Wyndham Clark as your second man in, right? I think that's going to be much lower owned. And if you started with, let's say, a Rory Xander, and because Rory is, right, a whole 2K cheaper than Scotty Scheffler, you can make this kind of combination work. Nobody's going to play this. Like, nobody's going to start Rory Xander, right? Maybe Rory just top 5s this week, right? Maybe he goes out there and his irons are much better than we expect. I'm not counting on that. I'm not playing them this week. But if he started like that, that would be another way to differentiate up top. So at least for me, I'm not really doing a lot of my differentiation up top, right? You can pick a range to really try and get different to the field. To me, I kind of like that in the 9K. There are a few guys down here that I really like as pivot plays. One of them being Jordan Spieth, who we mentioned before. And, I'm a sucker for the guy. I'm going to play him anyways. So that wasn't that much of a surprise. But there are guys like him. Wyndham Clark, I thought would be lower owned. I thought he was going to be a leverage play, but he's not. I guess it's Jordan Spieth down there. But there are a few lower owned guys that I'm taking, especially like 7Ks, even the 8K range. I think you can take for some leverage. Where it doesn't matter, right? If I'm taking all the chalk up here, it doesn't matter if my top plays, my top core plays, right, are going to be 20% plus owned. So just pick a range to get different. If you want to do it with lineup construction up top, I think that's possible. If you do the double spend up. And just know that Scotty Scheffler lineups are they're going to be popular, and it's going to put you on a lot of the same sort of players because of the salary component, right? You don't have as much flexibility when it comes to your second man in, which, in my opinion, like guys like Cam Young, right, Sahith Theegala, I've 30% owned. I'm out there with the Scotty Scheffler. So just know that there's going to be a lot of guys that the same casuals get to, and you probably want to avoid against playing the same sort of guys. It is a single entry, yes. It's a single entry $5. Thoughts on Sahith, 5th last year, spraying it off the tee. Yeah, I don't think he's the best course fit, but he did play well here, and I think the form's a little bit sneaky. People absolutely love playing Ludwig in single entry. Yeah, he's a sharper guy that people like to play. Like the sharper the contest, the higher dollar of the contest, the more that you'll see him played. And people absolutely love playing. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Who else is super high owned in single entries? Scotty's normally higher owned, the higher the stakes. That's something that I've noticed. And who else? Guys like Russell Henley this week, they'll be super high owned, and they're like, bigger dollar contest. I think Brian Harmon will probably be pretty chalky out there in single entries. JT Post, get some steam in single entries. A lot of the best plays on the slate, just the guys that fit the golf course, right? Team course fit, are the guys that get a lot of boost there. So yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of guys that fit that description. Thoughts on Putnam? I don't want to talk about him too much because I love him this week, Sam. Really striping it with the irons, has been one of the most accurate players on tour when it comes to distance from center of fairway. So he's able to set up angles off the tee, which is paramount around this kind of golf course. Still a little sick, guys. I apologize. I know it's probably a little annoying. But yeah, really good irons, really accurate off the tee. And the putter's been hit or miss, but that's okay. That's kind of what we expect from Putnam, and not too atypical of what we usually see. Are we expecting Sibu to be steamed up? Yeah, he'll be steamed up. It's a Pete Dye golf course. His form, too. I mean, the ball striking form is outrageous. And then you get him at a Pete Dye golf course. Yeah, I've got him at like 15%. So I think that's pretty sharp, pretty spot on right there. He will be a little bit steamed. go ahead and remind you guys, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and throw any questions you have down in chat. But I do want to go through a few of the pivots down here in the 9Ks. So we already talked about these 10K players for the most part. The 9K is where ownership starts to spread out a little bit, right? I mean, you have Rory up here, who's a little bit of a pivot, but outside of that, right, everyone's got some ownership. But down here, the 9Ks is where you have the Jordan Spieths showing up. Even Will Zalatoris, I think, is a little bit lower owned than he probably should be. You can say the same thing about Max Homa, and Homa is a little bit of a head scratcher, right? I mean, he's playing solid golf. If you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, he's playing a lot better now than what he was before. And maybe it's because a lot of databases, my own included, aren't including the unofficial shots gained metrics from the Masters. But even then, right, I mean, his shots gained metrics here aren't horrible, right? Still gaining a bunch on approach, still gaining with the putter, as you'd expect from a Max Homa. And last week was in contention at a major championship, right? A type of event, by the way, majors, that he hasn't played well in the past. So I think that that is good news for his future. And then at $9,700, I thought he'd be higher owned than Tommy Fleetwood, and it's actually backwards. I've got Fleetwood at 15.5%, and I have Max Homa at 10.7%. So that's what I meant. We're up top. Like, I'll take my Scotty chalk, I'll take my Xander chalk and move on. I'm okay with that because in this 9K range, there are legit pivots to be had. So there are some chalky guys who I guess we'll point out, like Matty Fitz, as you'd expect, getting some ownership, and Tommy Fleetwood too. I was kind of hoping he'd be lower owned just because of the fact that he's a little bit overpriced. I thought guys like Colin would steal away ownership, same with like Cantlay and Max Homa. But for some reason, maybe it's everyone talented up, right? Myself included, that's keeping that ownership a little bit inflated. So I don't love that for Tommy. I'm still playing him in DFS, but definitely getting a little bit steamed. Down here in the 8Ks, Cam Young is getting steamed to ever-living shit. Now, I like him this week. I think he's peaking with the iron play, which is usually something I try and tail right out there with the player. And by peaking with the iron play, I mean the shots gained metrics are just popping, right? It's why I love Shane Lowry this week, right? 1.35 shots gained approach per round. But Cam Young also gaining over a stroke per round right there. And off the tee at this course is slightly de-emphasized, which isn't great. But lately, right, it's been the iron play that's been carrying him. So at this golf course where he gained strokes putting 2 years ago en route to a top 3 finish, if he can go out there and gain with the putter again, right, it could be a really good start out there for Cam Young. So he's getting some steam, but I kind of get it. He is a piece of chalk that I'm playing. But then you have guys like a Tony Finau, right, a Justin Thomas that are about 7-8% ownership that can offset, right, all of that higher ownership that you're taking. So there are pivots to be had down here. I think Corey Connors, even Shane Lowry, they're at like 17%, are guys that you're going to have to keep an eye on when it comes to that game theory angle. So, I started off the DFS section by saying that this is a week where we really have to be careful about ownership. It's not that you can't take 2 or 3 of these chalky guys in a lineup. It's just being very intentional about getting different with your last 2 or 3 spots. So it's a week where you can't be lazy about it. If you're playing on an optimizer, if you're playing with 150 lineups, you have to have rules set this week, because if you just go out there and optimize with a player pool of like 30, maybe 32 players out there for 150 lineups, you're going to get lineups that start just out of your optimizer, especially if you're using projections like mine that are, a lot of these chalky guys are much higher projected out there in my projections. That's why I say that. So if you used like Xander, right, it would give you a lot of Xander lineups that maybe have Fleetwood and Shane Lowry together, right? My core plays are all some of my highest projected plays on the slate. It's just going to spit out all these chalky combinations. What I'm going to do, and what I'm doing with my set of 150, is setting lineups where it's forcing in at least, right, sub 1.5% player, at least one sub 10% owned player into every single lineup that I take. So when my optimizer gets going, right, it's not just going to spit out a lineup where it starts with all that chalk, and then my last man in is like a 12% owned Hoagie, and then like a 9% owned Nick Taylor. Like, that's not going to be enough differentiation, right, for some of those lineups that are chalkier up top. So I would say it's a good week to hand build. I'm building 150 lineups, so that's not really possible, or at least not something I'm going to do out there for my own exposure. But down here in the 8K range, 9K range, there are spots to get that differentiation. So a few ways to get different and a few roles I'm going to set. I guess I'll spill the beans here. It's not going to give away too much because you're not going to know exactly who's in all of these groups for me. But I'm going to have groups, 2 different types of groups, okay? I'm going to have a group where I might be differentiating up top, or I might be differentiating down low. So the way I have it set is that one of these groups has to activate for every single lineup that I build. The one group will be some of these 8, 9K players, right? So maybe it might be a Jordan Spieth, who I mentioned, right? It might be him. Who knows? It might be a Justin Thomas at super low ownership, right? That might be getting mixed into a few lineups, et cetera, et cetera. Like Willie Z, you could say that about. Even Max Homa, right, at 10% ownership. One of the groups that might activate, right, to go out there and give me that differentiation, might be to take at least one of those kind of players. Might be those specific four, might be a little bit more than that, right? I'm including, but you get the idea, right? It might be differentiation up top. Or the other group, right, is where it's looking for that sub 5% owned player down low or that sub 10% owned player down low as well. So the way that my lineups are going to work is I'm going to take those 3 specific roles and I'll need at least 2 of them for the lineup to go through, right? So whether it's 2 pivots down low or whether it's a pivot up top and a pivot down low, I'm going to force in some differentiation in my lineup. So it's a week where I like a lot of chalk. I have to be very intentional about how I'm getting different. And because I'm a 150 maxer who's just frankly, I don't have the patience to build 150 by hand, I have to go out of my way to do that kind of stuff. So that's how I'm handling it. I try not to give away all my specifics when I'm building lineups. I try to give advice. I try to give people an idea of what to do, but I'm still playing against you guys in GPPs, right? So I have to keep, a little bit of a passive mindset on exactly what I say, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can approach it, right? Building some of those groups. Can Eric Cole come back to life? I think so. I haven't really checked in on his form lately, but he's probably not too far out of touch, right? So let's take a look at the last 12 rounds. So yeah, he's losing off the tee and gaining everywhere else. Yeah, he's not too far off at all. He's just losing it all off the tee, and it's a golf course where it's not about off the tee play. Count me in, I think so. Rory in somebody's core, I guess. Okay. What are my thoughts on Cam Davis? Good course history, a little bit chalky though. So to give you an ownership number out there on Cam Davis, I've got him coming in at 12.6%. So that's like 1.5 times a Tom Kim, 1.5 times a Harris English. But frankly, it's not out of hand. Like you can take a Cam Davis as a player in this range. Just don't mix him with a bunch of the chalk up top. So I think he's a pretty solid play, all things considered. Is Tom Kim a good course fit? If he's playing well, if he's got his form under him, he could win this golf tournament. He's won at Sedgefield, which is one of my top comp courses. He's the kind of guy that plays well at off the tee. I guess the opposite of heavy, right? Off the tee, light golf courses, right? Where you're not hitting a bunch of drivers. He tends to play very well. Good iron player, solid around the green player. Those are 2 things that you have to have around here. And he can struggle with the putter. He's a little bit hit or miss with the flat stick. And a lot of players that are a little bit shaky with the putter have played well here, including Jordan Spieth, who won this event while losing strokes putting, which is impressive. Brendan Todd, another guy who fits the course. So you liked Putnam, you liked Brendan Todd. I don't want to say much more about Todd too, because I'm hoping it'll be lower owned, but you're right. Accurate off the tee, good iron player, solid around the green, and can make some putts. So yes, I love him this week, but you be a little quiet about that. I don't want everyone playing Brendan Todd this week. What are my thoughts about Lucas Glover? Same kind of player. You play him at shorter courses, right? He obviously won the Wyndham Championship this past year, but the unfortunate part is that he's higher owned, right? So unlike a Brendan Todd, who I have at lower ownership, who actually is one of the highlighted plays that I wanted to go through, Lucas Glover isn't giving you that kind of differentiation. Now, does that mean that you have to avoid him? No, right? It's just that when you're building your lineups, he's not going to be that kind of player that you're taking at lower ownership. So unless you're getting different with one of your guys up top, it might be a little bit hard to get to a Lucas Glover, at least in my sort of builds, right? It might be a little bit hard to get to him because of the rules that I have set to go out there and get different. So I like the play, fits the golf course, has played well at comp courses, but unfortunately for Lucas Glover, is getting steamed, right? And it makes sense because he fits this kind of golf course. So I want to talk about the 7K range. A few players I want to point out. First off, Russell Henley, who I thought might be like 20% owned, but 16% at this golf course in the form that he's been in is, I actually think, pretty reasonable. He's got some of the best comp course history imaginable, just top 5, top 10 machine, pretty much at all of the golf courses. And when I was going through my comp course history, when I was going through all of my key stats out there on Monday, he showed up in every single category, literally every category that we looked at on Bet the Number, he showed up on. In every single comp course, he had at least a top 10 finish. So if you're looking for team course fit, and you can see my modeling, he's only number 10 because the shots gained metrics maybe aren't as good in general as what you see at this golf course. but the course history angle, the comp course angle, is literally number one in every category. So love that for Russell Henley. My throat's getting a little dry, so 1 second here, guys. I also want to talk about JT Poston here in a second. If you know anything about JT Poston, you know that I was a truther of the guy 3-4 years ago when he was pretty much a nobody out there on the PGA Tour. And it was because of the skill set that he brings to the table. He can be an elite tier iron player. He's a little bit streaky, but when he's on, he can go out there, gain in bunches out there with the irons. And he's one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. So at this specific type of venue where it's not really all about the off the tee play, he can go out there and win this sort of event. You compare it to the Wyndham Championship, a lot of the other events I brought up in my comp course history, and you'll see that he's towards the top of a lot of those leaderboards too. So the added benefit is that he's slightly lower owned than some of his counterparts here, right? So like Christian Bezainhout, I have a slightly higher ownership. Same thing with like a Cam Davis, a Taylor Moore. But because everyone in this range, you can see from like Brian Harmon the whole way down to like Cam Davis down here, or actually you can go the whole way even down to like Taylor Moore down here, right? From $7,800 the whole way down to $7,400. All of these guys are getting ownership. It's because they're all really good course fits. They're all pretty short players that have been good with the irons lately, that in a lot of cases, not all cases, like Akshay, right, doesn't have a lot of good comp course history, but a lot of them have played well at my top 3 comp courses. So you got like McCarthy there, Batia, Kirk, Bezainhout, Poston, English, Davis, Kim, and more. And frankly, if I could play everyone in this range, I would. Like, if there was a way for me to somehow build lineups with leverage that had all of these players in them, I absolutely would, because I get why they're chalk. I get why people are playing them. But the side effect of it is that they're lower owned than they should be, right? Because there's so many guys that are priced right next to each other that everyone wants to play. They can't all be high owned, right? They can't all be 15, 20% owned. So that's why we get somebody like Poston at like 10% ownership. Whereas if this was priced more efficiently, if these guys were more spread out across the pricing, I think they'd be much higher owned than they are right now. So something that I noticed when I was building my poll is I wanted to put a yes next to all of these players. You can't do that, right? If you're going out there and trying to get leverage, but I do think it makes pretty much everyone in that range a little bit more attractive because the ownership's a little bit more spread out. We talked about Brendan Todd, love him at 7,100. So I guess we won't add on to that. Justin Rose is an extremely low-owned player. He's one of the only sub 5% owned guys that I'll be getting to. Really good comp course history. Has played well at Pebble Beach, which is one of my top comps. And also super cheap, right? $6,600. And then Peter Malnati, who, of course, won the Valspar Championship, is the perfect kind of course fit here, right? Plotter type off the tee, more accurate with the irons. He fits this type of golf course, and he's coming in with really good form, right? Has a win out of his last 3 starts. You can see is a prolific gainer on this type of grass. I'm out here in 2024. So I'll take a shot on him, right? At $300 above the minimum. So if I want to start a little bit more aggressive, take a Scotty Scheffler, maybe even take, if you can make it work, a Xander as your second man in, right? You're really going to have to go into the 6K range. Might have to take a few 6K players. Way to do that might be to take Peter Malnati. Maybe you take a Nick Taylor, right? $6,600. And then you can kind of make that work with your last 4 spots. So it's, I like the slate. I love the pricing that they're giving us with Scotty Scheffler now. And the one thing I'll say that's different about these signature type of events is that the ownership's more condensed, right? I mentioned that out there at the beginning, which means that you have to be just a little bit more careful about the ownership angle when you're going out there and building lineups. Let's go over any last second questions that you have. Then we'll talk lineup construction and hop over to the prop side. I do have a whole video out on props already, so we're probably going to go through that a little bit quicker. So let's do our due diligence over here on the DFS side. Thoughts on the Webb Simpson? You're crazy, but I'm doing it too. So I like him. Elite level course history fits the golf course, right? Plotter at this stage of his career has made a living at this course, RSM Classic, Sedgefield, has a daughter named Wyndham after the Wyndham Championship. You're on the right sort of guy, Samuel. I like it. Thoughts on Dietrich? I'm surprised that he's coming in as high owned as he is. So you'll see over here, I've got Thomas Dietrich at what? 5% ownership. So it's not out of hand, but he is like twice the ownership of Malnati, right? Who has a win in his last 3 starts. So I think he's an okay play, right? 5% ownership is far from out of hand, but I was kind of surprised that people were playing him this week. Any Straka love? So I'm like a 6.5 out of 10 on Straka. I'm not a 10 out of 10 by any means. I'm certainly not low on him at this kind of golf course. I think it fits his game. What's his price tag, right? Super cheap. He's $7,200. The form's what worries me, right? 1 second, guys. Much better now. All right, so Straka was $7,200, and the issue is the iron play, right? He's losing about 0.6 strokes per round. 6 out of 10 because I think he fits the golf course. He's played well at a lot of my comps, but I do worry about that a little bit. All right, let's talk lineup construction. If you have any DFS questions, still feel free to go ahead and throw them down in chat. But I do want to shift our focus to actually building it through lineups. So I saw one more question. We'll go through it. Thoughts on Seamus Power? I don't have many thoughts on Seamus. I think that he fits one sort of thing, right? He's $6,100, kind of like Peter Malnati, who I'm taking as just a pure GPP flyer. That's what he is, right? He's low owned. He's like 2% owned. He's super cheap, and he's played pretty well at comp courses too. So $6,100 Seamus Power. He's a high upside player too. There's a time and place for it. Now, would I play him in a cash lineup? Probably not. But, large field GPP, one of my 150 maxes, I wouldn't be against it. I'm not getting there myself, but I would understand the play if you're taking it. Playing any Grillo? No, I am not. So let's talk through this lineup construction segment. So what I want to start off with is just what I'm thinking about when I'm putting together large field GPP lineups. And because I'm 150 maxing this week, I won't be building these by hand. If this was a major championship, maybe I'd have the patience to do so, but I'm going to be doing it with a computer. So we're not going to talk about that. What I'm going to make a little bit more applicable to everyone out there is how you could do this by hand. And honestly, you could take the same sort of logic and set your rules yourself, right? So just pay attention here. This is what you should be thinking about when building lineups. And it's not going to be about who we're playing here. It's going to be about how we're putting them together, right? So that's what I want you to focus on. So when you're building a lineup this week, because ownership is so condensed, because we only have 69 players to choose from, no cut, by the way. So we got to, change our thinking out there a little bit. We really have to pick a spot to get different. And as I mentioned before, I think getting different up top is a way that you could go about it, or getting different twice down low is another way to go about it. And if you do choose to get different up top, you should probably also get different down low with at least one of your spots. So I don't hate the idea, especially if you want to force in differentiation, right? You want to force yourself to be different to start with those pivots, right? So for the sake of this first lineup, we're going to pivot up top and down low, right? We're gonna take one in both ranges. So I'm gonna throw in Max Homa as somebody that I know I'm getting different with right off the bat. And then down low, I'm gonna try and find a sub 5%er. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take Justin Rose, who, like, you'd hate for him to be your second man into a lineup, but that's not where he's gonna come in, right? We're just going out there, taking our two low-owned options right off the bat. And now we can build a little bit more free. We can say, do we want Scotty in this lineup, right? If we wanted to, it's really going to ding our salary. So we're going to make this a non-Scotty lineup, and we're going to go ahead and throw in Xander Schauffele. So obviously a little bit cheaper out there with Xander, but he's going to be our spend up here. And he's chalky. That's totally fine, right? Because we already have our two main pivots in there. Next up, we'll go down here to the 8Ks. We can even take a Russell Henley in this sort of lineup. In the 7K range, I don't hate the idea of taking like a Post in there, right? Like he's got some ownership, but he's not mega chalky. And now for our last man in, this is where you want to reevaluate your ownership, right? So you took two pivots to start. Now you got to ask yourself, do I need a third pivot, right? Do I have too much chalk in my lineup where I need to make one more spot, a sub 10% owned player? So let's check, right? We got Homa, there's 10%. We have a free 4% owned Justin Rose. So great, those two spots, right? That's two spots where we could say we're getting leverage to the field. Xander, no. Same thing with Henley, no. Poston's like 10%, right? So our product ownership with, Xander Henley is relatively high, but Poston helps. Obviously, these two pivots are helping us get it down. As long as we're not taking a super chalky guy, and by super chalky, I mean like 15% owned, right down there in the 7K range, you're going to be totally fine. So really the only type of player I would avoid here, Straka's getting a little bit of ownership, so I might avoid that, and I'd probably avoid Tom Hoagie. Now, if you took Hoagie, you would be leaving $200 on the table, so do you think that slightly helps you offset it when it comes to spending your salary? But I think a perfect play here, or really a good way to end this, would be to take an Adam Schenk or Brendan Todd, right? So if you threw Schenk into this kind of lineup, I don't really care about the $100 that you're leaving, but you have two decently chalky players. two guys that I would say are pretty average ownership right out there with Poston and Shank, and then your two pivots down there. So I feel really good about this lineup's leverage. I'd feel pretty good about it being different in the largest of field GPPs, and you'd be totally fine, pretty much regardless of the contest you're entering, right? You can make this work in a single entry. You can make this work in like a 20 max, whatever sort of contest that you're entering. And if you were in a single entry, let's say that you were like in like 100, person single entry, you could be a little bit chalkier about it, right? So you could go down here and take like a Cam Davis, who's a little bit more chalky. And then for that last man in, I wouldn't really be worrying about ownership. So in fact, if this was a single entry, because we have Justin Rose is going to be like unowned in that single entry, you can even take a Taylor Moore out there in that sort of build. So, if we look at this, right, it's quite a bit of chalk right out here in this lineup. But because we have two pivots that we forced ourselves to, even in a single entry, this would be totally fine. It would have more than enough leverage to play against 100 other entries. So I like to point that out because I think some people think that you have to go way overboard with the leverage when you're building lineups, and they overdo it, right? They add too many pivots to their lineups, and they're wondering why they can't even bin cash like 20% of their builds, right? They're wondering why they're just leaking away all this money playing PGA DFS, and it's because they heard from somebody that game theory matters, and it does. I talk about it over and over and over again, right? Over here on these live streams. But don't take that as you have to play 6 pivots out there in the lineup, right? That's not what people are saying. That's not what people are saying when you have to get different. They're more so saying pick 2, sometimes 3 spots to get different and move on from there. If I was playing cash, if I was going with that kind of build, Scotty, there's a huge argument to playing him, but the price tag is, at least in my opinion, too prohibitive. So I would probably stay away from him in that sort of format. I love Xander for cash. He's been extremely consistent lately. Down here in the 8K range, I like guys like a Shane Lowry. I like guys like a Corey Connors, I think are great cash plays for this kind of slate. Guys like Brian Harmon, excellent cash plays. Chris Kirk, if you could fit him into a lineup, would work out there too. It's a lot of your course fits, a lot of your guys that maybe don't have as much of a ceiling, but make a lot of cuts right out there at the PGA Tour. Now this week, no cut. So that's not why we're taking them. It's more so that we're taking these players for their high floors, right? When you're playing cash, which is like 50-50s or double ups, if you're not familiar with the terminology, our objective is a whole lot different, right? Our objective in those contests, or we're trying to double our money or about that, right, out there for 50-50s, is we're trying to go out there and beat 50% of the field, right? We're just trying to be better than half of the other people out there. We're thinking a whole lot more differently than trying to hit the absolute nuts for a large field GPP. So those would be the sort of mindset differences that I'm taking between GPPs and then out there for cash contests. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the thoughts that are going through my head when building lineups. What I want to do now is, I guess, first, to anyone that was just here for DFS, salute to you guys. That's going to be it for the DFS side of things. So best of luck out there with your lamps. Smash a like button for me if you haven't already, guys. I can't see the live like button, but I'd love to get that over 100 for this live stream. So if you haven't already hit that like button, go ahead and do so. What are you waiting on? And subscribe if you haven't, so you can catch all of our live streams throughout the weekend. We're still going to talk props here, so live stream is still not over. So just a heads up there, still a lot of prop talk to go through, but we are going to be doing rounds 2 through 4 live streams. So if you're just a DFS only person, make sure to come back for that, for all the showdown talk for rounds 2 through 4. And all of those are going to be brought to you by guys by Ship It Nation. So we're going to have some extra content going on for that over this weekend. I'm going to try and bring in a few other sports, make little segments on those to show you guys exactly how to use some of those Ship It Nation projections and do all of that over the weekend. So we're going to have DFS streams for that, also over there on the prop side. So look out for that. But what I wanted to do, and this is why I brought down my tab, is I want to bring up my prop stuff. So let me bring up the prop averages so that we can go through those together. I do have a whole video on it, as I said before, but for anyone that didn't catch that, we'll give you the Spark Notes version. I'm out there for what to expect. So I've got that shared. Let me bring it up on my end. And like I said, if you were just here for DFS, totally get that. Salute to you guys. Best of luck this week, and go ahead and smash that like button for me. So here are the prop averages, and it's a lot of data here, right? So I don't want to overwhelm you guys with a bunch of numbers. The most important thing on here, if you're going to read anything, right, are some of the changes for this year. So the bottom of the sheet, and then my projections for 2024. So you'll see the course notes for 2024. I say that there was a lot of rain in Hilton Head. We mentioned that off the bat, but the course is going to be a lot softer this year. We have shorter rough. Rough is half the length of what we had compared to past years. The stronger field because of a signature event that will affect the scoring average. You can see that with the stats for 2023 up top as compared to like 2022 and 2021. And then you'll see down here at the bottom, I have it playing easier than last year. So I have the scoring average over the 4 rounds at like 1 under par. I think it might be a little bit better than that out there for Thursday. I have the birdie average at 3.8 per round. Because of the weather, I think it might be slightly better out there for Thursday. So for tomorrow, probably about a 4 birdie per round average. Your bogeys are worse at 2.4. Again, for the first round, maybe slightly lower there as they have easier conditions. So maybe like 2.25, 2.3 bogeys per round. Green and regulation average at 11.5, maybe closer to 12 tomorrow. And then fairway average at 9.15 per round, which for round 1, maybe it's like 9.25. I'm out there per round. So that's just to give you an idea, right, of some perspective when looking at props. And in terms of what I'm targeting, both of these websites are priced too optimistically, in my opinion. So what I mean by too optimistically are that both of these prop sites are giving guys strokes lines that are too low, right? They're posting guys like 2.5, 3 under par that I think are probably should be closer to like 1.5, maybe 2 under par. And then they're also posting guys at like 4.5, 5 birdies that I think should be at like 4, maybe 4.5 birdies. So there are going to be quite a bit of fades that I'm taking on both of these websites. Now, not only fades, there are a few positive stance plays that I'm taking. But to circle back to the weather, which maybe you guys didn't see earlier, if you're just joining us, it looks a lot better in the morning than the afternoon, right? Morning, calling for next to no sustained wind, sub 10 miles an hour until about noon. Then it cranks up a little bit. Wind gusts are pretty much non-existent in the morning. And then in the afternoon, those sustained winds go up to like 13 to 14 miles an hour. And then your wind gusts, they get upwards to 20 miles an hour late in the day. So your conditions early, I think, might even play like a whole stroke and a half under in terms of scoring average. Whereas the afternoon, I could see only playing like half a stroke under, right? So if you're playing showdown, I mentioned that before, play in the morning, guys. But when we're looking at props, that means if you're going to take positive stances, take them on some of your earlier starters. I think that's the way to go about it, right? So some of your guys that are teeing off close to like 9 a.m. local, maybe 10 a.m. local time that are playing in the lower winds, you could take for over on birdies at 4.5. You could try and find for some unders on strokes. Now, I think it's tough to find those just because of the pricing. I think they're too optimistic with their projections on both sites. But if you're going to do it, you do it on the early starters. You do it with the guys that are going to have lower winds. They're going to have the more receptive greens and attack it that way. On the flip side, right, if I think that everything is too optimistic and conditions are going to deteriorate, right, as the day goes on, regardless of site, if you're going to fade players, and I have a bunch of fades, and that's a majority of my exposure right now, then do it for the later guys, right? So we go to the bottom down here and find the later tee times. These guys that are teeing off at like 1:40 Eastern, right? That's when the winds have kicked up, right? That's when it's going to be like 13, 14 miles an hour of sustained wind. That's when those wind gusts are going to start to get pretty gnarly out there. And I don't think it's going to blow them off the course. We're not talking about like Friday at the Masters type of weather where it was like 40 mile an hour winds, but we are talking about wind gusts that are going to have an impact, right? That are going to make it play slightly harder. And if they're projecting for 5 birdies per round, in my projections, have the average closer to 4 per round, or if I only have the scoring average at like 1 under par, then there's going to be quite a bit of value to be had. So I did a whole video on some of the props that I'm taking. I'll give you guys a few more over here on the live stream. I'll try and keep them different than what I did for the video. So if you've already seen the video, I'm not going to go ahead and give you guys the same props, give you guys a little bit of a different exposure because I have a bunch of stuff right that I've taken for round 1, but hopefully that gives you an idea there. Am I going to make it up here for the weekend? It's a good question. I have a contingency plan. If Jordan Spieth gets into contention, I'll be there, Brant. I told a few of my family members, my buddies, I'm going to head up. I have a buddy of mine that said it'll come with me if that's going to happen. So we'll have to see. It's up in the air. It's not likely. He's not playing well. But if he gets into contention, I'll come up because it's a course that he can win at, as you've seen last year. You saw the year before that. So maybe. It's not on my list, but I'll definitely open to it if it comes down to it. I wanted to go. I kind of got a little bit like burnout after the Masters, if I'm being honest. I was like a little bit, especially Monday, I was like, oh, we got the signature event. I got to get all hyped up for it. But we're good now. I'm back to it now. Now I wish I had tickets. Now I wish I had the trip planned. But I've told myself if he gets into contention, we're going to that damn golf tournament. You know, I can't resist watching my boy in contention. It's just too fun. All right, let's talk through a few of these props. So just for the sake of memory, right? Over there on Underdog, we took the overs on bogeys. That's what we had over there for the video slip. So that's what we did over there for the video. What I want to show you guys is a few of the other spots. So it was a Tom Kim under on fairways is another one of the props that I added. And then the other one was a Sanjay M fade. So let me find Sanjay on here. I'm not sure if they've moved the Sanjay prop. They may have, but we'll have to double check there. So Sanjay, no, they haven't moved. It was these two props that I took as fades. So they are teeing off in the latter half of tee times, right? Tom Kim's about noon. If I think the fairway average is going to be about 9.25 per round, sure, Tom Kim, accurate driver. He's normally a top 20 guy on tour. He'd have to gain 2 fairways to the field just to tie this projection. And when you add in the fact that Tom Kim has been struggling lately with his driving accuracy, Masters he didn't, but that's because there's like 50-yard wide fairways. Before that, though, he was not playing very well with the driver. So I'll take the push equity all day out there at 11, taking his under. And then Sanjay M is actually dealing with an injury right now. If you guys didn't see the news, Willie Wilcox said that he's dealing with a wrist injury, and he's been playing poor. You've seen that with the shots gained metrics. So he's a player that I'll fade all day. If he shoots 69 or worse, that would be 2 under par, by the way, at this par 71. That would essentially hit for us over here with the under on fantasy score. So I took that. I also took the under over here on fairways. Again, just leaning into that weather narrative a little bit. Over here on Prize Picks for the video, we had some unders on birdies that we all took over there. But there's actually a few other props I like over here on this side too. So the first, and I'm kind of picking on my boy Tom Kim, it's not that I don't like him. He is one of my favorite players out there on the PGA Tour. So no disrespect to my boy Tom Kim, but he's been losing like a stroke per round with the irons over his last 12 rounds. So it was a little bit better at the Masters, but not much better out there for the major championship. So for him to be an entire green higher than what I think the average is going to be out there for round 1 is a mistake, right? You know, if he rebounds, I think that would put him at about an average player in this kind of field. I just don't understand why they haven't projected an entire green over the expected field average. So, you know, when you compare him to guys like a Xander, Cantlay, Wyndham Clark, right, he shouldn't be at that same sort of number. So I'm taking his under, and then I'm taking an under on Rory McIlroy pars or better. Rory has been really struggling this year. He's dealing with swing changes. The swing changes absolutely fell apart at the Masters. So maybe that was partially due to the fact that, you know, he was under pressure, trying to get the Grand Slam, all of that. But he's outside the top 75 on tour when it comes to bogey avoidance. And the bogey average here is normally like 2.5 or worse, right? Last year, the bogey or worse average was 2.58 per round. I'm projecting it for like 2.3, 2.4 per round in round 1. Rory has been like a lower half player in bogey avoidance, right? Like number 75 on tour in the 69 player field. It's almost all the top end players, right? Puts him clearly in the bottom 25 to 30 in the field. So he's a player that I took for an under on pars or better. And if just like some of the other overs on bogeys that we took over here in Underdog, it was guys at 1.5 over here. If they have a slightly better than average day and make 2 bogeys, which again is lower than the field average for bogeys, he would still go over, right? This prop or under, right? On pars or better over here on this site. So pars are better, right? Are pretty much the opposite, right? Of taking bogeys or worse. They're pretty much the same line, just worded a little bit differently. So if you wanted to take Rory over here in Underdog too, you could add him there too, because they also have him at that 1.5 bogey mark. So the payout wouldn't be great on that option. So I'd probably avoid that. The payout on 2 fades isn't great on Prize Picks either, but 2 props that I do see having a pretty high hit rate. So that's it for the prop stuff. Again, I'll bring up the averages as I go through some questions on here, but let's talk some outrights over here in a second as well. Same there. You'll end up going Saturday or Sunday though, regardless. It's a hell of an event, man. It's a signature field. It's a great golf course. I don't know if they're going to make it a signature event next year, so I'm slightly regretting not going, but we'll have to see. Hey, maybe he'll surprise us, get into contention, and I'll be there. That'd be pretty sweet. Thoughts on Keegan and Finau? Keegan low owned. He's a good GPP flyer. Finau, same thing. I've got Finau at like 7% ownership. Now, I don't love the course fit with Finau. There are some other guys in that range that I'm trying to jam in instead of him. But if you're looking to get different, you're just taking a shot on a good iron player, I understand getting there. So he's maybe not my favorite play personally, but I can understand taking him in your own lineups. All right, let's go through Hard Rock Bet, and then we're hopping on out of here, guys. I've pretty much gone through everything I want to. So unless you have any last questions, go ahead and let me know. The guys that I bet outright this week. So if you didn't see my core plays video, we'll go through them right now. It was Xander. It's Tommy Fleetwood. It's Shane Lowry. It's Brian Harmon. It's Tom Hoagie, who I believe is still 100 to 1. There you go. And Nick Taylor. So it's these 6 players. These are the guys that I've bet outright. Now, Tom Fleetwood, I got it 20 to 1, but the rest of these numbers are all either the same, if not better numbers than what I got over there on Monday. So not a lot of value went our way this week, but honestly, based on the last month or so, I've had a lot of numbers move in my direction, and I haven't cashed as many outrights as I've been hoping for. So maybe this week we're actually got a worse number in Xander than what's available now. Same thing out there with Brian Harman. Maybe they'll hit this time around. Who knows, right? Obviously, it's not great to see that, but it's like the first time it's happened this year, and it'd be the first outright that I've hit like a little bit over a month. The last one I hit was DJ out there at one of the live events. So let's try to get back on the wagon this week. So that's my outright card. I didn't take a lot of top 5, top 10s. I just went with a bunch of outrights out there for this event, and it's a lot of my core play and value plays. So not a lot of extras that I added. I didn't add anyone outright over there since Monday, but yeah, slightly better numbers available than what I was getting before. So feel free to indulge if you feel like tailing, or hey, if you feel like fading, feel free to go ahead and do that as well. That is all I've got for this live stream. I appreciate all your support here on the channel. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and check out the Patreon page to get all behind the scenes access. Of course, that's where I'm posting the spreadsheets that you see for the DFS side, and of course, all the different prop exposure that I'm getting to. So if you want direct access to all those research sheets, whether it's for DFS or over those props averages, right, that I'm posting for every single round, that is exactly where you can find it. Not only do I do main slate content round 1 stuff, but I do showdown for rounds 2 through 4, and also do prop content for all 4 rounds. I give extra stuff over there for Eurogolf. I see props that make sense there too. And now that we're getting LPGA stuff over there on Prize Picks, Underdog has posted LPGA a few times. That's something that I'm trying to at least dip my toe into a little bit as well. So keep an eye out for all of that. That is all posted on the Patreon page for all that extra content. But as for the weekend, still going to have our round 2 through 4 live streams, and going to have a lot of the Ship It crew there because it is that sponsored stream. So looking forward to that. Hopefully you guys have yourself a solid week. Had one over there at the Masters and are ready to get back after it for this signature event. Appreciate you guys. Smash that like button if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys for the content for the rest of the weekend.